Okay, let's try industrialization again. I just did a 50-minute video or so. Obviously, there were some issues with that. So, what I'll do is I'll kind of cut them down to maybe three 20-minute videos. It's a real shame. I brought my A game to that, and now I'm pretty hoarse. So, we'll do what we can. Um, I haven't had a chance to look at your discussion post yet. It's been a weird week. I've had technological problems. I fried one laptop, had to start using another, and well, obviously it failed me today too. So let's talk about industrialization. But before that, hope there was no confusion about Reconstruction. I just used the video from last semester since I'd already done the work. It'll actually be the same for the last half of class. Middle yellow. Because I did those videos last semester, but I'm happy to I'll add new videos if necessary to add things or to clarify or whatever. One thing I didn't talk about in the introduction video that I meant to was historical relativism. And it goes to, why do we talk about history? Is it just to learn about the past because it's cool? That's what I like to do, but the truth is it should be relative to today. So what we should be doing as we look at these various things is looking at the past, see what it tells us about the present to help us plan the future. So that's what I kind of want you to keep in mind. That's one reason we do the discussion boards. So you can kind of, discussion boards are designed to kind of be loose so you can kind of take your discussion in any direction you want to. But it's something to think about is, how are things similar to today? What does it tell us about today? So very much keep that in mind. Again, I apologize about my voice. This is going to be very difficult. I've been sick this weekend. That's one reason for the delay too. It's not been a great start to the semester for me. All right. Industrialization. We're talking about 1865 to 1900. In fact, that's basically what we're going to be talking about for the next 3 weeks. We have industrialization, westward expansion, and then the Gilded Age. Though industrialization and the Gilded Age should go back to back, but your book doesn't think so. So here we are. So again, hopefully this will be as good as the first lecture, as understandable. So industrialization, 1865 to 1900, very important time for our country. We see the emergence of big business. The U.S. was very late to the Industrial Revolution. You see a little bit of it before the Civil War, but in the Northeast and North mostly. But it's going to really take off with a vengeance after the Civil War. The gross national product of the United States will rise 171% between 1865 and 1900. I didn't do very well in economics, but that's a good thing. The gross national product, not that I didn't do well. C's, though economics are fascinating. So why does the United States do very well with industrialization? Well, frankly, if you're going to make a laboratory for industrialization, the United States would be perfect. We had raw materials and cheap labor. We have lots of coal to fuel industry. We still do, though it's mostly worthless now. We had iron, lead, copper, silver, gold, wood, cotton, and oil. Basically everything you need, a starter set for industrialization. We have cheap labor because of immigration, for one part. At this point in history, 1 in 5 Americans are foreign-born. Millions of Americans also move from the rural areas, from the farms to the cities looking for jobs. So there's an influx of people looking for jobs. We'll explain why they leave the rural area later on. Women, children, and Native Americans entered the workforce, though they will be paid less. Technology continues to emerge during this period. Many will file for a patent, 20,000 per year in the 1890s. If you've ever watched Shark Tank, they talk about patents all the time. Here are a few patent owners. George Eastman for Kodak, which was originally a camera. Now it's a pharmaceutical. I don't know how that happened. William Burroughs, the adding machine. That was exciting for me when I was an accounting major. I still have an adding machine somewhere. Isaac Singer for Singer Sewing Company. Be one of the first international companies, in fact. Alexander Graham Bell, the bane of my existence with the telephone. He'd be pretty surprised with what it's like now, I think. Thomas Edison, with lots of inventions, some of which he stole. This is also the time of Nikola Tesla. If you're interested in a paper topic, Nikola Tesla is interesting because he had some ideas that were really out there, that some of which we haven't even been able to kind of reproduce. One thing, we went with direct current, Edison's electricity idea, but he was actually able to power things over longer distance without wires. I guess kind of like Wi-Fi today. The reason it didn't take off is because Edison smeared him basically by frying an elephant on stage with electricity. Something you really can't get away with now. But Tesla really was ahead of the curve. And he's very interesting if you're looking for a paper idea. You also had James Matzler, who invents a machine to make shoes called the lasting process. Cobblers were actually one of the few kind of skilled areas that were left for a while, but now we're mass producing shoes, which has always been interesting to me. We pay some people pay hundreds of dollars for shoes, Air Jordans and things. And, it's very cheap to make. They're like $1 a pair. Now, one of the reasons I found out is that there's artificial scarcity because a lot of people actually buy up shoes, so they're able to kind of dictate the price. A few years ago, I learned that one of the main people into that was a 15-year-old boy who was making millions of dollars on shoes. Crazy, right? I always wonder what it'd be like to actually find a cobbler and get a pair of shoes actually made for my foot. That would be super comfortable. The government will help by supporting railroads and building roads. They'll give 180 million acres in land grants, 500 million in tax breaks and loans. They practiced laissez-faire economics, which meant hands off. They basically allowed industry to do whatever industry wanted to do, thinking that it would be good for the good of society. I don't think that works too well. We're going to see the emergence of large corporations, during this era, owned by stockholders. Stockholders were limited liability. You could only lose what you put in, and if it's profitable, you make money on either the sale of stock or dividends. Before the Civil War, most businesses were small scale, only acting within a few hundred miles of where they lived. After 1865, we see the beginnings of larger markets, seeking a larger market for more profit. You could reach larger markets today thanks to the railroad and the telegraph. The telegraph was invented by Samuel Morse. Morse code, ... .. I think that's SOS. I don't really remember. Does anyone know Morse code? I'd be interested to hear that. Samuel Morse invented it. Basically, it went across what looks like telephone lines, and you can send messages to anywhere that was wired in the country. You had companies like Western Union emerge to, collect those messages and give out telegrams. Now it's a money company. I think they might still do telegrams. I don't know. Telegrams are cool. You don't find them very often. Samuel Morse, the very first message he ever sent from, I think it was Washington to Baltimore, though I may have it backwards, was, "What hath God wrought?" So, obviously he had kind of mixed feelings about his invention, But what it does is it allows people to order things over long distances, and then they could be shipped via the train. Um, so we see the formation of large corporations with thousands of employees. We begin to see factory complexes. In 1865, there were dozens of railroad companies that had 35,000 miles of track, most in the Northeast and the Midwest, a few in the South. The 35,000 miles of track weren't very good because different companies had different measures for their tracks. So basically, if you got to the end of one, you had to unload the train and load another. It wasn't very efficient. They were financially unstable. Many were poorly managed. By 1900, through consolidation and integration, 193,000 miles of track were dominated by just 7 companies. This will, of course, add speed to travel and help create a national economy. It opened up new areas for settlement. Many people will settle in railroad towns. At first, competition between railroads companies led to the expansion of offlines. Everybody was trying to be the first to get somewhere. Next week, we're going to have a video about the Transcontinental Railroad. So, it'll have more about it then. I actually like railroads. By the 1870s, larger companies began buying smaller ones. The Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central, Pennsylvania Railroad from, Monopoly, had thousands of miles of tracks with tens of thousands of employees. They had millions of dollars in capital and revenue, and soon other industries began to incorporate like the railroads, using stock sales to raise capital. If a company profited, as I mentioned, stockholders did too, through dividends or selling the shares when they were worth more. You begin to see the emergence of professional management teams. Stockholders' liability was, of course, limited, as I mentioned. You can only lose what you put in. Manufacturing, mining, communication, and finance companies all incorporated. This led to standardization across the industries, which meant that, you can get a job in any finance company and be roughly the same, not a lot of training. We also see one thing we get because of the railroads is actually time zones and standardized time. Before, each town kind of had their own time. It could be like 8:15 in Washington and 8:23 in Baltimore. That's not great for railroads when you're dealing with schedule. You want to schedule as well as possible to make as much money. And if everybody's on a different time, you can have collisions. So we start using the time zones and a standard time. They also began to use standardized equipment and tracks. The largest railroad companies got more and more complex. Jay Gould was the main railroad guy, one of the robber barons. We'll talk about robber barons. He brought in management companies, a superintendent, managers, and clerks, even a new form of accounting. We began to see more advertising and special pricing. This will spread to other industries like steel, oil, manufacturing, and others. There was a mixed reaction to the rise of the railroads. People were glad for the expansion of movement and being able to move to new places, but they were concerned about the power of the railroads and other corporations in everyday life. And this was a major concern. They worried about monopolies. They worried about the influence over the government. Railroad executives often bribed legislators and cabinet officials, manipulated their stocks, and gouged farmers and manufacturers just because they could. They would often exploit their workers, use shoddy construction, and have basically unsafe operation. Many wanted to curb the power of the railroads. The railroads will also lead to conflict with Native Americans in the West and the depletion of the buffalo. Many people wanted tighter regulation of industry, but politicians were reluctant to regulate. They were conservative, and frankly, they're getting paid. Farmers resented and hated the high rates that the railroad companies charged them. In the 1870s, they formed a group called the Grange, comes out of a farmers' alliance. where they're able to get several laws regulated prices and railroads different states. They saw they couldn't do anything on the federal level, so they worked on the state level. Were very successful for a time. Andrew Carnegie is who we'll talk about next. We're going to talk about the steel industry. Steel was much stronger than iron. It was used to build railroads and other things, buildings, bridges, things like that. You could use it to build large factories. You could use it to build machines and plows and mechanical reapers, which commercialized agriculture, which is one reason so many people came from rural areas to the cities. Because in the farm areas, you had big families because you needed the labor. Now you didn't need so much, but now you still had big families. It also made better weaponry. The most prominent in the age of steel was Andrew Carnegie. He was born in Scotland in 1836. He came to America in 1848. He settled in Pittsburgh. He dropped out of school to work at a textile factory, earning $1.20 a week. Not a bad salary, actually. He took night classes in accounting and taught himself how to use the telegraph machine. He worked for Western Union. In 1853, at the age of 17, he was hired as a private telegrapher and then private secretary for the Pennsylvania Railroad president, Thomas A. Scott. He learned about business. He became rich in investing in railroads, factories, iron, and steel. In 1870, he owned a company that made steel bridges and moved completely to steel production. He wanted to reduce production costs as much as possible, so he hired executive accountants, managers, scientists, and engineers. He would invest in R&D, research and technology, and development. He would get the latest technology. He was the first to invest in the Bessemer-Kelly process, which made stronger steel at a lower cost, and also reduced the need for skilled workers, which was cheaper. Eventually, Carnegie did what was called vertical integration. Basically, that's where you start buying companies that help your company. So, like, he couldn't control the materials coming in. He had to buy those from someone. He couldn't control the railroads or the ships, so he starts buying those things. He'll also do horizontal, which is where you just start buying out your competitors. Carnegie bought mines, smelting, railroads, and ships. So basically, he controlled from start to finish everything he needed. He tried to eliminate competitors by slashing prices, and he would bankrupt many of his opponents. A lot of people think Scrooge McDuck, the Disney character, is based on him, though Scrooge McDuck is a better person, I think. He made secret deals with the railroad, and all of this was legal. He began to have annual profits of $40 million by 1900. And he became the largest corporation in the world with over 20,000 employees in many different countries. He was the most successful in the age of steel, and the entire industry employed 272,000 workers, producing 10.4 million tons of steel a day, twice that of Germany and Great Britain, who were the first industrial powers. Other industrialists, and we're going to finish Carnegie's story when we get to the Gilded Age. And we're going to talk a little bit more about him later. He's a very complicated figure, like most of the robber barons are. And you're going to have to decide whether or not you think he's a good man or a bad man, a hero or a villain. I kind of look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. That's actually a good spot to end part one. So wish me luck that this will actually take this time.